The space station Nexus 7 floated in the darkness between stars, a beacon of light and commerce in the emptiness of space. Ships from 100 different worlds docked at its many ports, bringing goods, people, and occasionally, trouble. In the lower levels of the station, far from the watchful eyes of security, lay a tavern known as the Void's Edge. It was not a place for tourists or merchants. This was where soldiers of fortune, bounty hunters, and mercenaries gathered to find work, share information, and drink away the memories of their last jobs. Tonight, the back room of the Void's Edge was filled with the galaxy's most feared mercenary captains. They sat around a large table, drinks in hand, weapons within easy reach. The air was thick with smoke from alien cigars and the tension of competitors forced to share the same space. At the head of the table sat Craddock, a massive four-armed Zertulian. His dark scales seemed to absorb the dim light of the room, making him look like a shadow-given form. 3 yellow eyes blinked independently as he surveyed the gathering. His fourth eye had been lost in some long-ago battle, replaced with a cybernetic scanner that glowed red in the smoky air. "I thank you all for coming," Craddock said, his voice like gravel being crushed. "I represent a client with deep pockets and a problem that needs solving." The mercenaries leaned forward. In their line of work, problems meant profit. Craddock reached into a pouch at his waist and pulled out a small crystal. He placed it in the center of the table and a hologram sprang to life, showing a rotating emblem, a human skull with wings and a dagger through it. 5 million universal credits, Craddock announced. Half now, half upon completion. A murmur went through the room. 5 million credits was enough to buy a small moon in some systems. Captain Lorna Visk, one of the few humans in the room, frowned at the emblem. She was a tall woman with short blonde hair and eyes the color of steel. A long scar ran from her left temple to her jaw, a reminder of the Proxima Wars where she had earned her fearsome reputation. Lorna crossed her arms over her chest. "Target?" she asked simply. "A human special forces unit," Craddock replied, his upper lip curling in what passed for a smile among his species. "The 87th Orbital Drop Regiment. They've been interfering with certain business interests." The room went silent. The rotating emblem continued to spin, casting moving shadows across the faces of the gathered mercenaries. One by one, eyes turned to Lorna, the only human captain present. She stared at the emblem, her face unreadable. Vrax, a serpentine saurian, mercenary, was the first to break the silence. "Impossible. Not for any price." He stood, his scales clicking together as he moved. Without another word, he left the room. Others followed. Tazik, whose people had evolved on a gas giant and whose environmental suit hummed constantly, simply floated up and drifted toward the door. "Find someone else," the translator on his suit buzzed. Soon, more than half the room had emptied. Those who remained looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats and avoiding Craddock's gaze. "Have you all lost your nerve?" Craddock demanded, slamming one of his 4 fists on the table. 5 million credits for eliminating 1 human unit." Lorna Visk finally spoke. "They're not just any unit, Craddock. The 87th has a reputation." "All humans die the same," Craddock snarled. "Maybe," Lorna replied calmly. "But these ones make you work very, very hard to find out." She stood up and walked toward the door. Craddock's cybernetic eye whirred as it followed her. "You too, Visk? I thought you had no love for your own kind." Lorna stopped at the door and turned. "This isn't about loyalty. It's about survival. Smart. Predators don't hunt what they can't kill." She left without another word, leaving Craddock with just 3 remaining mercenary captains, the youngest and most desperate in the room. Later that night, Lorna sat in her private quarters aboard her ship, the Scarred Victory. She was cleaning her pulse rifle when there was a knock at her door. "Enter," she called without looking up. The door slid open to reveal Daxtra, a slender blue-skinned Valurian. His species was known throughout the galaxy for their analytical minds and logical approach to everything. He had joined her crew 6 months ago as a tactical advisor, "Captain," he said, his voice musical and precise. "I have a question, if I may." Lorna nodded, continuing to clean her weapon. "Why did everyone leave?" Daxtra asked, genuinely puzzled. "The credits were substantial. I have observed that mercenaries rarely turn down profitable jobs." Lorna sighed and put down her rifle. She walked to her desk and tapped a few commands into the computer. A screen lit up on the wall. "Computer. Access archive footage, Battle of New Tehran, Earth calendar 2157. The screen showed a barren landscape, buildings reduced to rubble. The view was from a helmet camera, bouncing slightly as the wearer moved through the destruction. Suddenly, the view ducked down behind a fallen wall as explosions rocked the area. The 87th was trapped behind enemy lines, Lorna explained as the footage continued. Outnumbered 20-1. No air support. No reinforcements coming. On the screen, the camera turned to show a group of humans in combat armor. They were checking weapons, tending to wounded, their faces dirty and tired, but determined. "Watch. What happens next?" Lorna said. The footage showed the squad leader, a man with a sergeant's stripes, gathering his people around. There was no audio, but it was clear he was giving orders. The soldiers nodded, clasped hands briefly, then moved into positions. What followed was hard to follow at first, a blur of movement, explosions, gunfire. But as it continued, patterns emerged. The humans moved as if they could read each other's, minds covering each other, drawing fire, flanking, retreating, only to lead pursuers into ambushes. "They held for 3 days, Lorna said quietly. 3 days with no sleep, little food, against constant attacks. They didn't just survive. They inflicted heavy casualties." Daxtra watched, his large eyes blinking rarely. "How is this possible?" "Their enemies had superior numbers and position. That's the thing about human special forces," Lorna replied. "They train for impossible situations. They expect to be outnumbered, outgunned without support. And they find ways to win anyway." She turned off the footage. "There's a saying on Earth, when the impossible becomes probable, send in the special forces." Daxtra considered this. "You were once part of such a unit?" Lorna's hand unconsciously touched the scar on her face. "No, but I fought against them. That's how I got this, and why I'm smart enough not to take Craddock's job." She stood up and moved back to her rifle. "Those 3 captains who stayed? They'll take the job. They'll fail. And if they're very, very lucky, they'll live long enough to regret it." 3 weeks after the meeting in the Void's Edge, the jungle moon of Verdant orbited silently around a gas giant. Blue-green plants covered most of its surface, broken only by shallow seas and the occasional rocky mountain. It rained almost daily, feeding the thick vegetation that grew taller than most buildings. Hidden beneath the jungle canopy, a small research outpost stood in a clearing. Solar panels glinted whenever the sun broke through the clouds. The outpost looked peaceful, with scientists in white coats moving between buildings. But watching over them were soldiers in gray and green armor, members of the 87th Orbital Drop Regiment. Sergeant Frank Miller stood at the edge of the clearing, his eyes scanning the jungle. He was a solid man with short brown hair and a face that had seen too much sun and trouble. Nothing in his posture suggested he was worried, but he hadn't survived 12 years in special forces by ignoring his instincts. Something felt wrong. Frank tapped the communication device on his wrist. "Miller to all points and status check." One by one, his squad members reported in from their positions around the perimeter. Everything normal. No signs of trouble. But the jungle birds had stopped singing. Frank didn't rush. He didn't raise an alarm. He simply clicked his comm twice, a prearranged signal that meant "be alert." In response, the scientists began to move unhurriedly toward the central building, while the rest of Frank's squad adjusted their positions slightly. To anyone watching, it might have looked like a normal shift change. It wasn't, and someone was watching. High above the jungle canopy, a stealth ship hung in the air. Its hull bent light around it, making it nearly invisible. Inside, Ural Blackclaw studied the readouts from his sensors with growing frustration. Ural was a Thraxian, a predatory species with natural armor plates and razor-sharp claws. His kind evolved as ambush hunters, and he had turned those instincts into a successful career as a mercenary leader. "They know we're here," his sensor operator said nervously. "Impossible," Ural growled. "Our stealth systems are the best in 3 sectors. They have no technology that could detect us." "Then why are they moving to defensive positions?" Ural leaned forward, his yellow eyes narrowing as he watched the humans below. The movement was subtle, but unmistakable to a hunter like him. They were preparing for something. "It changes nothing," Ural decided. "Begin the operation." Around the ship, 20 elite mercenaries activated their jump packs and descended silently toward the jungle. Each was equipped with active camouflage that changed color to match their surroundings. They carried weapons designed to kill quickly and quietly. On the ground, Frank Miller felt rather than heard the displacement of air as something passed overhead. He raised his hand in a simple gesture, and his squad immediately took cover. "We have incoming," he said calmly into his comm. "Unknown number, stealth tech, probably mercs." He paused. "You know what to do?" The response came from Lieutenant Alan Garcia, who was inside the main building with the scientists. "Understood, Sergeant. Pattern echo, pattern echo." It wasn't a standard military tactic. It was something the 87th had developed themselves after an ambush on Europa years ago. It was designed specifically for situations where they were outnumbered by technologically superior enemies who relied on stealth and surprise. The first mercenary touched down just inside the tree line, his active camouflage making him blend with the foliage. He was a Krell assassin with forearms and specialized goggles that allowed him to see heat signatures through walls. He scanned the area, focusing on the main building. "I count 12 targets in the central structure," he reported quietly. "4 more on the perimeter." "Too few," Ural responded from the ship. "Find the others." The Krell continued his scan, moving deeper into the compound. That was when he noticed something strange. The heat signatures weren't moving like people. They were too regular, too steady. "Something's wrong," he began to say, but never finished the sentence. A simple tripwire, not electronic but actual wire, caught his leg. He stumbled forward, breaking his careful stealth pattern. In that moment of imbalance, a single shot from somewhere in the trees took him down. No flash from the weapon, no sound, just a small dart that penetrated his armor at the joint and delivered a fast-acting tranquilizer designed specifically for Krell physiology. "Vex is down," another mercenary reported, alarm in his voice. "Impossible," Ural snapped. Nobody could see him. But the humans hadn't seen him. They hadn't needed to. As the mercenary team pushed forward, they encountered more low-tech traps, tripwires, pitfalls covered with leaves, simple but effective methods that their advanced sensors were not designed to detect. And each time a mercenary was forced to break stealth pattern to avoid a trap, a silent shot would find them. In the ship, Ural watched in growing anger as his team's signals went dark one by one. Not dead. The humans were using non-lethal methods, but out of the fight. "Enough games," he snarled. "Full assault, now." The remaining mercenaries activated their weapons and charged the compound. At last, they would force the humans to show themselves. But the humans were already gone. The heat signatures in the buildings were decoys, simple heating elements arranged in human shapes. The real soldiers and scientists had slipped away while the mercenaries were being picked off one by one. "Find them!" Ural roared, pounding his control panel in rage. His ship's sensors swept the jungle, looking for any sign of the humans. Nothing. Then, a message came through on all channels, a human voice calm and almost friendly. "This is Sergeant Frank Miller of the 87th Orbital Drop Regiment. You have entered a restricted area and engaged in hostile actions against Earth personnel. We have disabled 12 of your team with non-lethal means. This is your only warning. Leave now." Ural snarled at the message. "Empty threats. They're running. Find them and finish this." His remaining mercenaries spread out into the jungle hunting for any trace of the humans. Hours passed with no contact. Night fell on Verdant and the jungle became even more dangerous. Strange calls echoed between the trees. Shadows moved where they shouldn't. The mercenaries grew nervous, jumping at sounds and firing at nothing. Then the humans began to hunt them. They came silently, from directions no one was watching. A mercenary would simply disappear from his position. Communications would cut out mid-sentence. The humans never attacked from the same direction twice, never used the same method. By dawn, Ural had lost all but 2 of his team. His ship hovered above the jungle as the sun rose, illuminating the research outpost below. It looked exactly as it had the day before, as if nothing had happened. The scientists were back at work. The soldiers patrolled calmly. The only evidence of the night's events was a small clearing near the edge of the compound, where all 20 of Ural's mercenaries sat or lay on the ground, disarmed and bound. None were seriously injured, though all looked shaken. A message flashed on Ural's screen. Attached was a complete dossier on him, his ship, his homeworld, and his family. The message was simple. We know who hired you. We know why. This time, everyone goes home alive. There won't be a second time. Ural Blackclaw, who had fought in battles across 12 star systems and never retreated, gave the order to leave. As his ship broke orbit, he made a personal note to refuse any future contracts involving human special forces. Some prey, he decided, was not worth hunting. Craddock was not happy. The news of Ural Blackclaw's failure had spread quickly through mercenary circles. 2 other teams who had taken the contract against the 87th Orbital Drop Regiment had also returned defeated, those who returned at all. In True, his private quarters aboard his ship, the 4-armed Zertulian paced back and forth, his scales darkening with anger. His client was becoming impatient. The Human Special Forces unit continued to disrupt operations, costing millions in lost profit. Something had to be done, but direct action had proven useless. Craddock needed information. He needed to understand what made these humans so difficult to defeat. Computer, contact Selna Mavrok, he ordered. The screen on his wall lit up, showing a slender, pale creature with large black eyes and no visible mouth. Selna Mavrok was a Vexian, a species known for their perfect memory and complete lack of combat ability. They had instead evolved to become information brokers, gathering and selling secrets throughout the galaxy. Craddock, Selna's voice came through clearly despite the lack of visible lips. This is unexpected. I need everything you have on human special forces, Craddock said without greeting. Specifically the 87th Orbital Drop Regiment. Selna's eyes blinked slowly. That will be expensive. Cost is not an issue. Very well, but I must warn you. What you learn may not help you defeat them. Craddock slammed one of his fists against the wall. Just get me the information. 3 days later, Selna delivered a comprehensive report. Craddock spent hours reading it, his anger gradually turning to concern, and then something close to fear. Unlike most species, humans had not developed their special forces through technological advancement or genetic engineering. They had done it the hard way, through millennia of warfare against themselves. Before humans had reached the stars, they had spent thousands of years fighting each other. Each generation had refined the art of war, creating training methods that pushed human bodies and minds to their limits and beyond. Selna's report detailed how human special forces were selected and trained. The process was brutal by any standard. They trained in environments specifically designed to break them: Arctic cold, desert heat, high mountains, deep oceans. They deliberately practiced in scenarios where technology failed, where they were outnumbered, where everything went wrong. They don't just train until they get it right, Selna had written. They train until they cannot get it wrong, even when exhausted, injured, or under extreme stress. Most troubling was the psychological profile. Where other species warriors fought for glory, money, or duty, human special forces displayed a bond with each other that transcended rational understanding. They would endure impossible odds not for abstract concepts, but for the comrade beside them. Craddock called Selna for a direct consultation. Is this accurate? He demanded, pointing to a section of the report. They voluntarily reduce their sleep to 1 hour per night during training. They carry weights equal to their own body mass over mountains. They train underwater with their hands and feet bound. All accurate, Selna confirmed, black eyes unblinking. And those are just the basic exercises. The advanced training is classified, but rumor suggests it is far more intense. How do they survive such training? Many don't, Selna replied. The dropout rate is high, but those who complete it become something unique in the galaxy. Soldiers who treat hardship as normal and impossible odds as simply another challenge. Craddock switched to another section of the report. What about their equipment? Surely we can counter their technology. That's another problem, Selna said. While they use advanced technology when available, they train extensively to operate without it. They can navigate by stars, communicate with hand signals, create weapons from natural materials, and survive in environments that would kill most species. The information broker paused. There's something else you should know. Something not in the report because it's difficult to quantify. What? They enjoy it. Craddock's scales darkened. Enjoy what? The challenge. The hardship. Where other species see problems, human special forces see opportunities to prove themselves. The worse the situation, the more they seem to thrive in it. Selna leaned closer to the camera. There's a human phrase, "Who dares wins." It's the motto of one of their oldest special forces units. They believe that bold action, even in the face of overwhelming odds, can succeed where careful planning fails. Craddock was silent for a long moment. Then he asked, how do they think? How do they make decisions in combat? Unlike most military forces, human special forces operate with what they call mission command. Each soldier doesn't just know their own task, they understand the overall mission goal. If leaders are killed, communications fail, or the situation changes, every soldier can adapt and make decisions to complete the mission. Selna brought up new information on the screen. Training footage showing human special forces in action. Look at how they move, the information broker said. No two teams operate exactly the same way. They adapt their tactics to each situation, rather than following standard procedures. This makes them unpredictable. The footage showed humans fighting in different environments. Dense jungle, urban ruins, open desert, even zero gravity. In each case, they moved differently, used different tactics, but always with the same lethal efficiency. But they're just flesh and blood, Craddock protested. They can be killed like any other species. Of course, Selna agreed. But consider this. Most species evolved avoiding danger. Self-preservation is their strongest instinct. Humans are different. In the right circumstances, they will override their survival instinct in pursuit of a goal. The information broker brought up one final piece of data, a quote from a human military historian. The strength of a special forces soldier isn't that they're not afraid, it's that they take action despite their fear. They use it as fuel, rather, than allowing it to paralyze them. Craddock stared at the screen for a long time after Selna had disconnected. The report painted a picture of an enemy, unlike any he had faced before, not because they were stronger or faster or had better technology, but because they thought differently, trained differently, and fought differently than any other species in the galaxy. For the first time since taking his client's contract, Craddock wondered if it could be completed at all. Perhaps direct confrontation was the wrong approach. Perhaps there was another way to deal with the 87th Orbital Drop Regiment. But first, he needed to speak with someone who had seen them up close. Someone who had fought alongside them rather than against them. He needed an insider's perspective. The abandoned mining facility floated silently in the Oort cloud of the Sol system, far from the usual space lanes. Once it had harvested ice from comets, but now it drifted empty and dark, a forgotten relic of earlier days of space exploration. Or almost empty. A single light burned in what had once been the facility's control room. There, Craddock waited impatiently. His massive form seemed too large for the human-sized chair he perched on. One of his 4 hands constantly checked the blaster at his side. He didn't like being this close to Earth, the human homeworld. If anyone discovered why he was here, the consequences would be severe. The airlock hissed open. Craddock turned quickly, 2 hands moving to weapons, but he relaxed slightly when he saw the newcomer was alone. Moro the Kilrathi entered slowly, leaning on a walking stick. His species resembled upright felines, with fur-covered bodies and pointed ears. Once Moro might have been an impressive, physical specimen. Now he was clearly old. His fur had turned gray and he was missing 2 of his 4 eyes. The empty sockets were covered with simple patches. He moved with the careful steps of someone in constant pain. "You are Craddock?" Moro asked, his voice a low growl. "I am. Thank you for coming," Moro snorted. "Your payment was generous, though I would have come for half the amount, just to tell someone my story again." The old Kilrathi lowered himself slowly into a chair across from Craddock. "So, you want to know about human special forces?" "Yes. Specifically the 87th Orbital. Drop Regiment, if possible." "The 87th? No. I served with the 42nd Marine Raiders. But Special Forces units are similar in many ways." Craddock leaned forward. "You're the only non-human I could find who ever served with them. How did that happen?" Moro's remaining eyes looked distant, seeing something far away and long ago. "The war. Hive mind incursion, 30 years back. I was a scout for the Kilrathi Defense Force. When the hive mind attacked my home world, Earth sent help. Among them was a Marine Raider unit. My knowledge of the terrain was valuable to them, so they made me an honorary member, I suppose you could say." "What were they like?" Craddock asked. "In battle, I mean." "Like nothing I had ever seen," Moro said simply. "My people are warriors. We pride ourselves on courage and skill. But the humans—" He shook, his head slowly. "They were something else entirely." The old Kilrathi was quiet for a moment, lost in memory. "Our first mission together, we were dropped behind enemy lines. Bad intelligence, bad landing. Everything went wrong from the start. We were supposed to be 10 kilometers from hive forces. Instead, we landed almost on top of them. What happened? I expected panic, fear. Instead, the human commander just smiled and said, 'Target-rich environment, boys and girls. Saves us the walk.' Then they went to work." Moro took a small flask from his belt and drank deeply before continuing. "My squad survived 14 days behind enemy lines. No food after the 3rd day. Minimal water. 6 of the humans were wounded, 2 seriously. They carried their injured the entire way. Refused to leave anyone behind even when it meant putting the whole squad at risk." Moro's voice dropped lower. "They told jokes during firefights. They made impossible shots. When surrounded, they charged, instead of retreating. I thought they were crazy at first. Later I realized it was a kind of controlled insanity. They did what the enemy would never expect." "But how did they fight?" Craddock pressed. "What tactics did they use?" "That's just it," Moro said. "They didn't have one way of fighting. They adapted constantly. When stealth was needed, they were ghosts. When force was required, they were thunder. Sometimes they would split into tiny teams hitting from all directions at once. Other times they moved as a single unit, concentrated and unstoppable." The Kilrathi's remaining eyes fixed on Craddock. "But you want to know how to beat them. That's why you're here." "Yes." "My advice? Don't try. But you won't take that advice, so I'll tell you a story instead." Moro shifted in his seat, wincing at some old pain. "Our last mission together. We had gathered critical intelligence on the hive mind's central node. We needed to get it back to the command ship in orbit, but we were deep in enemy territory and the hive had found us. Lieutenant Lisa Dawson was our commander, a small human female, but with eyes that could freeze your blood when she was angry. When we were finally cornered, she ordered me to take the data we'd gathered and make a run for it while they created a diversion." Moro's voice grew distant. "I watched from half a kilometer away as they engaged an enemy force 20 times their size. They were in a small valley with steep walls, nowhere to retreat, nowhere to hide. Perfect killing ground, but not for them, for the enemy to kill them." "But they fought anyway," Craddock said. "Fought?" Yes, but not like desperate people facing death. They were laughing. Human soldier Nick Evans was even singing something they called cadence while he reloaded his weapon. They should have died in minutes. But they survived? Craddock asked. Morrow was silent for a long moment. No, they died. The answer hung in the air between them. But they held for 3 hours, the Kilrathi continued. 3 hours against overwhelming force. Long enough for reinforcements to arrive, long enough for the information I carried to reach command, long enough to make their deaths mean something. He leaned forward, his ancient eyes suddenly intense. That's what you're not understanding. They knew they would die, and they considered it acceptable, not desirable. They aren't suicidal. But if their deaths accomplished the mission, they were prepared for that outcome. All species die for causes, Craddock objected. But how many do it with clear eyes? No false hope. No delusion that they might somehow survive. The humans knew exactly what would happen in that valley. And they went anyway. Morrow stood up slowly, using his walking stick for support. Your client isn't offering enough money in the entire galaxy to make that contract worthwhile, Zertulian. You think they cannot be defeated, Craddock said, a statement rather than a question. Oh, they can be killed, Morrow corrected. But defeating them? That's something else entirely. Kill one team, and another comes. Kill that team, and another. As long as the mission matters, they will keep coming. The old Kilrathi moved toward the door, then stopped and looked back. There's something else you should know. Something important. What? Remember, every soldier, every unit keeps track of those who harm their own. There's an old human saying, no better friend, no worse enemy. If you become their enemy. Morrow shrugged. Well, I wouldn't want to be in your position. With that, he left, leaving Craddock alone with his thoughts and a growing sense that he had made a terrible mistake in accepting this contract. The contract remained open, but no reputable mercenary crew would touch it. Word had spread quickly through the underworld of hired guns and soldiers of fortune. The 87th Orbital Drop Regiment was off limits. Those who had tried to fulfill the contract against them had failed, often spectacularly. Some never returned at all. 2 weeks after his meeting with Morrow, Craddock found himself back at the Void's Edge Tavern on Nexus 7 Station. He sat alone, at the bar, nursing a drink and pondering his next move. His client was becoming increasingly angry about the lack of progress, but Craddock had run out of mercenaries willing to take the job. This seat taken? Craddock looked up to see a human man standing beside him. He was of average height with short brown hair and regular features. He wore civilian clothes, a simple jacket and pants with no visible weapons or armor. Nothing about him stood out. He looked utterly ordinary. That was what made Craddock immediately suspicious. It's free, the Zertulian said cautiously, one hand moving toward the disruptor hidden beneath his cloak. The human sat down and ordered a drink from the bartender. Name's Jack, he said conversationally. Heard you've been asking about the 87th. Craddock's scales darkened slightly, a sign of alarm in his species. His hand closed around the grip of his weapon. The human made no move to stop him, which was somehow more terrifying than any threat. I wouldn't, Jack said casually, not even looking at Craddock's hidden hand. There are 3 snipers currently aimed at this table, and that's just the ones. I brought as a courtesy. The human smiled and took a sip of his drink. You're bluffing, Craddock said, but there was doubt in his voice. Jack shrugged. Maybe. Want to find out? For a long moment, neither moved. Then, slowly, Craddock released his weapon. What do you want? The Zertulian asked. Just a friendly chat. Jack slid a datapad across the table. Take a look. Craddock picked up the pad with one of his 4 hands. On it was detailed information about his client, a Tauran shipping magnate, named Volds, who had been smuggling illegal biological weapons through protected space. There was evidence of transactions, communications, even the location of hidden storage facilities. At the bottom of the file was a simple message. We know. Your Client targeted the wrong people, Jack explained. We were investigating his bioweapons operation when he decided to put a contract on us. Bad move. How did you find me? Craddock asked. Please, Jack said with a small smile. You've been asking about us all over the sector. Not exactly subtle. The human leaned forward. We're not interested in you, Craddock. You're just the middleman. We're here to deliver a message. The contract is officially closed. My client won't accept that. Your client doesn't have a choice. Jack tapped the data pad. This information is being sent to Earth Central Command and the Galactic Council as we speak. By tomorrow, Voles will be too busy running for his life to worry about contracts. Craddock studied the human carefully. Nothing about him suggested military training or special abilities. Yet something in those eyes, something cold and calculating, told Craddock that this ordinary-looking man was anything but. You're with the 87th, Craddock said. It wasn't a question. Me? Jack smiled. I'm just a messenger. But yes, I have friends in the regiment. The human stood to leave, then paused. One more thing. There's a reason we let stories about us circulate. There's a reason alien mercenaries warn each other about taking jobs against human special forces. He leaned closer, and something ancient and predatory showed behind his eyes. It saves us ammunition. With that, he walked away, disappearing into the crowd of the tavern as if he'd never been there. Craddock sat motionless for several minutes. Then he paid for his drink and left. He had a sudden, urgent need to be far away from human space. 2 days later, news spread throughout the sector that Voles, the Toran shipping magnate, had been found dead in his heavily guarded compound on Tau Ceti 4. His security system had been disabled, his elite bodyguards neutralized without a single fatality, and Voles himself had been dealt with cleanly and efficiently. No evidence of the killers was ever found. The only clue was a small fabric patch left on Voles's desk, the insignia of the 87th Orbital Drop Regiment, with its motto written below, silent, watchful, ready. In a luxury suite on Nexus 7 station, Lorna Visk watched the news report about Voles's death with a knowing smile. Her first officer, Dax Tra, stood beside her. It was them, wasn't it? The Valurian asked. The 87th. Of course, Lorna replied. They don't leave loose ends, but they let Craddock live. They let him live so he could spread the word. Lorna turned off the screen. That's how they operate. Sometimes the most effective weapon isn't a gun or a bomb. It's a story. She walked to the window of her suite, looking out at the ships coming and going from the station. When I fought against human special forces in the Proxima Wars, my commander didn't understand them. He thought they were just skilled soldiers, that if we killed enough of them, they would break like any other unit. But they didn't, Daxistra said. No, they adapted, they learned, and in the end, they won. Lorna touched the scar on her face unconsciously. I was lucky. I survived and learned from the experience. Throughout the following weeks, the story of what happened to Voles and the mercenaries who had taken his contract spread through every corner of the galaxy where hired guns gathered. It grew with each telling, becoming something between a cautionary tale and a ghost story. On 100 different worlds, in bars and hideouts and crew quarters, mercenary captains warned their newest recruits about the one rule that might save their lives someday. We don't take contracts against human special forces, not for any price. And in the darkness between stars, the ships of the 87th Orbital Drop Regiment continued their silent watch, protectors of humanity's interests across the vastness of space. They didn't need glory or recognition. They didn't seek fame or wealth. They simply did what they had always done, the impossible, the necessary, the job that no one else could do. Silent, watchful, ready.